Scylla and Charybdis. Ulysses had been told in Tartarus of these two monsters that guard the narrow waterway leading to Thrinacia. Each of them hid beneath its own huge rock, which stood side by side, and were separated only by the width of the strait at its narrowest point. So strait is a place, strait, marginal note here, draw this. A strait is a place where the land comes very close together on both sides, and there's just a little bit of water area that goes between them. Charybdis dwelt in a cave beneath the left-hand rock. Once she had been a superbly beautiful naiad, daughter of Poseidon, and very loyal to her father in his endless feud with Zeus, lord of earth and sky. She it was who rode the hungry tides after Poseidon had stirred up a storm and led them onto the beaches, gobbling up whole villages, submerging fields, drowning forests, claiming them for the sea. She won so much land for her father's kingdom that Zeus became enraged and changed her into a monster, a huge bladder of a creature, whose face was all mouth, and whose arms and legs were flippers. And he penned her in the cave beneath the rock, saying, "Your hunger shall become thirst. As you once devoured land belonging to me, now you shall drink the tide thrice a day." Thrice means 3 times, but that is a marginal note over here. Now you shall drink the tide thrice a day, swallow it, and spit it forth again, and your name will be a curse to sailors forever. And so it was. Thrice, or 3 times a day, she burned with a terrible thirst, and struck her head out of the cave and drank down the sea, shrinking the waters to a shallow stream, and then spat the water out again in a tremendous torrent, making a whirlpool near her rock in which no ship could live. So torrent, very, very, you could look that up and write that definition over here as a marginal note. Torrent, a very, very strong current. This was Charybdis. As for Scylla, who lived under the right-hand rock, she too had once been a beautiful naiad. Poseidon himself spied her swimming one day and fell in love with her, and so provoked the jealousy of his wife, Amphitrite, that she cried, "I will make her the most hideous female that man or god ever fled from." So again, the jealousies and revenge of the gods and goddesses, that has created Scylla. Put that over in the margin over here. Again, the jealousy and revenge of the gods or goddesses on one another has created something. In this case, it created Scylla. Thereupon she meaning Amphitrite, changed Scylla into something that looked like a huge fleshy spider. This makes me think of Arachne. There's a connection here. Looks a little like Arachne, maybe. With 12 legs and 6 heads. She also implanted in her an insatiable hunger. Look up insatiable. Insatiable hunger. A wild greed for human flesh. This word insatiable is sort of defined here. You should look it up. Satiable and insatiable. Satiable would be the base word. When any ship came within reach of her long tentacles, she would sweep the deck of sailors and eat them. Her hunger was insatiable. Ulysses stood in the bow as the ship nosed slowly up the strait. The strait, remember, is that narrow little bit of water between land on both sides. The roaring of the waters grew louder and louder, and now he saw wild feathers of spume flying as Charybdis sucked down the tide and spat it back. He looked at the other rock. Scylla was not in sight, but he knew she was lurking underneath, ready to spring. He squinted, trying to measure distances. The only chance to come through unharmed, he saw, was to strike the middle way between the two rocks, just beyond the suction of the whirlpool and just out of Scylla's reach. But to do this meant that the ship must not be allowed to swerve a foot from its exact course. Couldn't go even a foot in either direction, for the middle way was no wider than the ship itself. He took the helm, bade his men keep a perfectly regular stroke. Think of forbade and bade. He bade his men. He commanded his men. Highlight or circle this. Commanded. He commanded his men keep a perfectly regular stroke. Then, considering further, he turned the helm over to Eurylochus and put on his armor. Grasping sword and spear, he posted himself at the starboard rail. For, he said to himself, there is no contending with the whirlpool. If we veer off our course, it must be toward the other monster. I can fight any enemy I can see. The men rowed very carefully, very skillfully. Eurylochus chanted the stroke, and the black ship cut through the waters of the strait, keeping exactly to the middle way. Sorry about that. They were passing between the rocks now. They watched in amazement as the water fell away to their left, showing a shuddering flash of seabed and gasping fish, and men roared back again with such force. Or I read this wrong. They watched in amazement as the water fell away to their left, showing a shuddering flash of seabed and gasping fish, and men roared back again with such force. I think this should say then. And then roared back with such force, because the water roared. The men didn't roar back. I think this is a typo. And then roared back again with such force that the water was beaten into white froth. So many, many, many millions of bubbles on the top, and it was frothy. They felt like the top of a Coke can, and you've when it's been someone has shook it up a little bit too much. So froth, you could even draw a picture over here of what froth would look like. They felt their ship tremble. Well done, cried Ulysses. A few more strokes and we are through. Keep the way, the middle way. But, and that means a change in direction of the story. But, when measuring distance, he had been unable to reckon upon one thing. The ship was being rowed, and the great sweep of oars projected far beyond the width of the hull of the ship. And Scylla, lurking underwater, seized two of the oars and dragged the ship toward her. So you could even draw a picture showing what's happening here. He calculated the width of the ship. Let's say the ship was this wide. But he didn't calculate the oars sticking out as the men are trying to steer the boat, row the boat through the water, through the middle passage here. So she didn't account for the oars sticking. He didn't account for the oars sticking out. And Scylla grabbed those oars and pulled the ship toward her. Dumbfounded, Ulysses saw the polished shafts of the oars, which had been dipping and flashing so regularly, suddenly snap like twigs, like tiny, tiny little sticks. They were snapped by Scylla, and before he knew what was happening, the deck tilted violently. He was thrown against the rail and almost fell overboard. He lay on the deck, scrambling for his sword. He saw tentacles arching over him. They were like the arms of an octopus, but ending in enormous human hands. Can you picture that? So, like an octopus, but each of the ends, the tentacles, had hands. So you're able to grab things like with your hand. So that's an interesting aspect of Scylla. He found his sword, rose to his knees, and hacked at the tentacles. Too late. The hands had grasped 6 sailors, snatched men screaming through the air and into the sea. Ulysses had no time for fear. He had to do a number of things immediately. He roared to the crew to keep the ship on course lest it be swept into the whirlpool. Then he seized an oar himself and rowed on the starboard side where the oars had been broken. From where he sat, he could see Scylla's rock, could see her squatting at the door of her cave. He saw her plainly, stuffing the men into her 6 bloody mouths. He heard the shrieks of his men as they felt themselves being eaten alive. He did not have time to weep, for he had to keep his crew rowing and tell the helmsman how to steer past the whirlpool. They passed through the strait into open water. Full ahead lay Thrinacia, with its wooded hills and long white beaches, the Isle of the Sun Titan, their next landfall.